So Chicago's having another lockdown. That's fun. Which means I have access to absolutely nothing when it comes to cosplay crafting. So over on my Patreon, I made a poll, and my patrons voted for this month's video. It was supposed to be how to make seasonal outfits for your characters, but I can't get any new fabric, and I'm also scared of the outside world right now. Numbers keep going up, and I'm just gonna stay in the safety of my bubble for now. So we're gonna work with what we have. I still wanted to make it about the seasons, and since it's fall, as you can tell by my gorgeous backdrop here, I wanted to make like a fall piece that I could eventually add to a seasonal outfit or just create my own character to go with it. I have these two corset pieces, and I've been wanting to make a corset. Bottom line, I've been wanting to make one. I want an excuse. Here's my excuse. I can't go outside, but I found this fabric in a box. So McLean and I have been cleaning up the room that's over there that you can't see on camera. There's a table over there, and underneath that table there was a box, and in that box there was just a few rolls of fabric. And one of the rolls of fabric that we found was this kind of like, I don't even know what to call this fabric. It's woven really nicely. It's a very thick fabric. It doesn't fray. If anybody knows, if you can tell what this fabric is, please let me know. That's what today's video is. We're going to be making a fall corset. Now, the first thing that I have to decide if I want this like jumpsuit kind of corset or just a basic corset. And I think for this use, I think this is definitely a very specific style for like if I wanted to make a poison ivy, or even if I wanted to have a corset that was always tucked in with a skirt. But for this fall corset, I want it to be universal. So I'm going to be going with McCall's 7306. And I think that one might be the best universal and the best use of this kind of fabric. So the next step, I guess, would be is to take this out, go over the instructions real quick, and cut out all the pieces. I cut everything out, okay? I cut all the pieces out that I need for this project. As much as I appreciate them using recycled paper, making them nice and thin for packaging, to make my life easier, I'm going to be transferring this to some brown paper. This will allow me to add seam allowance like for each individual piece, and I'm going to transfer all the markings. This just allows me to be able to transfer the same size pattern to the inner facing, the lining, and the front facing fabric, so when I put all the pieces together, it's all the same shape and they're not like wonky, like one's a little bit wider. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. With any project, you're gonna wanna iron out all of your fabric, especially if it's been folded up and stored away for a while. I do this especially because I'm going to be doubling up on my fabric, as you see here. And just to take note, I do cut out some extra round pattern pieces for the cups, but I ended up not using them because I didn't like how they looked. As I'm cutting out each pattern piece, I am going to be labeling the panels 1, 2, 3, and so on as I cut out the lining and the front-facing fabric. After everything's been cut out, I iron on the interfacing to the front-facing fabric and the lining as well. I saw a tip in the instructions, and although the first tip said to mark which ones are the wrong sides, I've already put the interfacing on so I know which side is the right and the wrong. But another thing they said is that you can label the wrong side with the number fabric, so that even though I have these tiny little markings, which you may or may not see on camera, I will always know that this will be piece number 1, and that whenever I need to reference or figure out what piece I'm sewing, I can just look at this blue tape and then peel it off when I start putting things together towards the end. Editor Izzy here to tell you that I made a little bit of a mistake when I was labeling these panels. Panels 1 and 2 are actually labeled upside down. I do end up fixing this issue later, but after I've already sewn the entire lining. But for now, I am going to flip the camera around so that you can clearly see where the actual top of the corset is and the bottom. So where I went wrong is that I didn't transfer my side markings for where patterns are supposed to line up. So either make sure you're double checking your pattern as you sew or transfer all of your markings. So the next thing to do is just sew all the panels of the interfacing and the front facing fabric. So after sewing all the lining and the front facing fabric and fixing the mistake that I had mentioned earlier, it was time to work on the boning channels. So I took strips about 1.5 inches and I made a lot of them because there's going to be a lot of boning channels going into this. Since no one was going to see these markings, I used a fine tip marker to create the lines for these boning channels. I made a seam line down the center so I knew where to line it up. Then I essentially created lines on either side so that this 1/2 inch boning would fit in between. I would highly suggest ironing down the excess fabric along the seam to make your life easier, but I was in too much of a rush to care about it. Instead, I just started pinning away. First, I pinned down the seam line that I had created, and then took pins going in the opposite direction, making sure everything stayed in place. Then I took it over to the sewing machine and sewed down the outer lines that I had created for the boning channels. Now I have all of the boning channels sewn, and yes, I did use red thread, mostly because I was lazy, but also so you can see where I was sewing my boning channels. Now for everything to lay nicely and so that everything matches up with the front facing fabric, I just cut away all the excess fabric that came from the boning channels that I created. Now I just got this boning off of Amazon a while ago, and if you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description, but you want to make sure anytime you cut your boning to round off the edges. You don't want sharp edges to poke through your fabric or end up poking you while you're wearing it. Now before actually inserting all of the boning, I cut off all the excess fabric that came from the boning channels as well on the inside of the fabric so that there wasn't any excess bulk. Speaking of excess fabric, you want to make sure that everything is laying flat before you actually sew it together. So for the front facing fabric, I had these extra flaps along the seams, and I ended up hand sewing them down, making sure I did not poke all the way through the fabric, that I was just catching enough for it to sew down flat. Okay, so I am running out of time. Today is the absolute last day that I can work on this. I have all the panels all sewn together, all the boning is in. And now it's mostly just putting things together, putting eyelets in it, and sewing myself up and putting any details that I want. What I'm about to do is put the right sides together, which I've already done with this one. I'll show you a better angle of this, but I am sewing on the sides and top because I am going to put like a border piece at the bottom, so I'm going to leave this open so I can turn everything inside out. So now I'm just going to cut off all the excess fabric so when I turn things right side out, it's less bulky. Now we're getting very close to the end of this project. As you see, the lining still wants to peek out towards the front, and I do not want that. I do not want to have to deal with that with photos. So instead, I decided to put a top stitch on the side and the top of the seams. This really helps just making the corset look a lot more finished. Now the only thing left to do is add a top stitch on the other corset, add some grommets to both, and finish the ends. Of this fall inspired corset. I had a lot of fun making it. It was very intense. intense due to the time crunch. I did learn a lot though while making it. I will say, if you do decide to make a corset specifically, make sure you do a mock-up first. Definitely when you're working with a piece that's supposed to be snug up against your body, you want to make sure you make a mock-up of it first. The corset itself is about, I'm gonna say, 1 inch to 2 inches too big all the way around. I did have to overlap the fabric when sewing myself into this corset in the front and in the back. You can see in the close-ups here how I had to overlap everything. It still turned out nice. It still looks nice. It looks purposeful since I have it done in the front and in the back. It doesn't fit quite snug, but I do still like how it turned out, and I'm very proud of myself being able to make a decent corset on the first try. Like, as you see, it's a little big up top here, so there's a lot of adjustments I would make for the future if I was ever going to use this pattern again. Another thing that I think I would say, if you are going to use this pattern and do the grommets, make sure you use a little like fabric glue or even super glue will do to make sure these grommets stay in place. This one has already come out, and I think that's just due to poor installation of it, because I was going really fast trying to finish up this corset. But again, I am very proud of this. I am very excited to incorporate it into future projects and to incorporate this pattern into other pieces. As always, all the materials that I used in this video will be in the description below. I want to give a shout out to all my patrons for supporting me and my cosplay adventures. If you would like to check it out and join, the link will be in the description below. When you join, you get exclusive access to a bunch of content, including albums, digital art, wallpaper, updates, behind the scenes, and more. So please head on over, at least check it out, consider it. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope I see you guys in the next video. Bye!